Hi everybody, my name is Noah Bond,
And I'm Jack Kelly.
and today we're going to be going over the life we expect on Europa and how alien life has been portrayed in different mediums over time,
Yeah, so we're going to look at some films and video games
as well as some books.
that have been popular recently and kind of compare and contrast that with what modern science tells us we might find on Europa.
Right, so starting off, we're going to be looking at life portrayed in different mediums in different ways. First of these ways is advanced cultures. Now, what a lot of early science fiction did was it would portray life on alien worlds as being so far out there and so confusing or complicated that humanity is just beneath them in every single way. One of these was Halo, which was culture-wise not too different from human culture, but they were so technologically ahead that the only way humanity could survive was by trying to copy alien technology as much as possible.
Right. Yeah, Halo if everything was very humanoid based, but the technology was just so far beyond. And I think that's really a common theme in a lot of alien movies today is that they all have this technology that is just so far beyond Earth. Like in Avengers,
Right.
when
Chitauri?
the Chitauri when they came to Earth, and they have all this technology that's so far beyond what we have today. It's just a really interesting take that science fiction really likes.
Mm-hmm. Especially modern science fiction, which is much more action-based than more classic science fiction. On the subject of more classic science fiction, we have Contact and Arrival. Arrival being adapted from the book Story of Your Life, and Contact being adapted from the book Contact. Both of the aliens in these movies are completely beyond human comprehension. They have languages and technology that don't follow any established rule of physics, and they would appear that they don't make sense by any context at all.
Right, I mean that's what the entire plot of Arrival was,
entire plot of Arrival was trying to understand an alien language that wasn't even really a language.
Right. It's very different. It's a lot more advanced than just our life.
These aliens serve more as a metaphor for the unknown and foreign than for an analog for alien life itself. They sort of were more of a plot device than a really fleshed out alien culture.
Now we also see aliens like that have ways of speaking and logic that are just completely different from our own in A Martian Odyssey, right?
Yes, that was a pretty interesting short story of a man encountering a Martian and then several different Martian species, and each one is more and more bizarre from the last. Some of these species have a form of higher intelligence. In the book, the way they describe it is being able to add 1 and 1 and make 2, but not being able to add 2 and 2 and make 4. And that gets brought up a lot because these aliens have intelligence, but their intelligence is so foreign that it doesn't make any sense to a human observer.
Right, but then, so not all pop culture is like this, though. We have some that portray aliens like they're basically humans.
Right, and one of these examples is Thor Ragnarok and Guardians of the Galaxy, which had pretty similar settings. So the first 2 Thor movies were set in a very Norse mythology-esque, knights and Vikings and so on, setting, and the third one moved it to the junk planets, and from there it was pretty much just a human culture, except they were aliens instead of humans.
Right, I mean the aliens are speaking English, and they're, for the most part, humanoid. They always have some sort of weird features, but
yeah.
they really look and behave much like humans. They sleep like us, they eat like us, so they just feel very similar to humans.
Guardians of the Galaxy was also very guilty of this. Guardians of the Galaxy feels sort of like a Wild West story of prisons and outlaws and bandits, but
it just takes place.
It just takes place in space.
So people are technically aliens.
I think the biggest offender of this is Star Wars.
In fact, wait, going back to Guardians of the Galaxy, isn't actually one of the characters a human?
He's half human.
He's half human,
yeah.
Okay.
But I think the biggest offender of this is Star Wars.
Now, Star Wars they look like humans, they talk like humans.
They have, pretty much just like planes that function as spaceships, but they're more plane-like than spaceship-like because they can bank in space, which is something that spaceships wouldn't actually be able to do. And all of the planets that people go to in the Star Wars movies all have breathable atmospheres and human-like gravity. In reality, if people just tried crash landing on random planets, it's likely that they would die immediately due to either heavy gravity or like an atmosphere that can't support them.
Right. It's also really interesting in Star Wars how many planets are all so close, but they're all not just habitable; they're all inhabited.
Yes.
And when we look at our solar system, we just really don't see that. Some pop culture displays life or portrays life in a manner that's a little closer to what we actually expect to find when we find, or if we find, some kind of exoplanet that does have life, right? Like in Halo, while they do have those really advanced species, we also see in Halo Flood.
The Flood.
Oh, sorry, the Flood
in Halo.
Right? It's a parasitic species. It's like a virus, and they have a hive mind. So it's not exactly what we expect to see, but it's a lot closer to the microscopic life. It's at least the right size.
It is at least the right size, and it basically functions like a virus. It spreads through different species, but it is its own form of life. Another similar type of life we've seen in pop culture is the StarCraft Zerg, which in the StarCraft 2 story, you sort of find how the Zerg have evolved over time, and that they've had millions of years, and they started off, like how we theorized life on Earth started with bacteria, and then it grew and grew into primal species, and those primal species evolved over time into the quote-unquote modern Zerg, which function kind of like humans. They're a very insect-like species. They also have a hive mind and a hierarchy, but it's something that started off like how we expect to find life on Europa.
Right, because we didn't just we didn't start as a cell and then pop,
Boom,
we're humans.
Humans.
It's a
Pop,
long process.
Pop goes the Cambrian explosion.
So, this entire series is focused around Europa and the life we could find there, because it really has a high potential to host life, doesn't it?
Especially compared to everything else.
Right. So, NASA, when they're looking for life, they really expect three things. We've mentioned these three things before. There's nothing special. It's just you have to have some sort of water, because water is really important in organic chemistry. You need some kind of form of energy, right? You have to be able to sustain your natural processes. And then you need organic compounds to break down for said natural processes. And scientists, according to astrobiology at NASA, believe that Europa has all three.
And we believe that there could be some forms of extremophile bacteria that have adapted to cold on Europa. Scientist Brad Dalton at NASA subjected various bacteria that we have on Earth to Europa-like conditions, extreme cold, the low pressure but still existing atmospheric conditions, and determined that a few of them could actually potentially exist, or bacteria similar to these could exist on Europa.
And it's not just the fact that they can handle these conditions, right? So there's also there's kind of this discrepancy in the IR spectra that we get from Europe. For viewers that aren't familiar, the IR spectra is when we look at a substance or planet, we expect to see a certain range of radiation. And when we look at Europa, we look at the ice on Europa, which is most of the surface, it looks just like water ice.
Right.
But if we look at the cracks, because Europa's surface has a lot of cracks, sometimes referred to as chaos, if we look at those cracks, it doesn't match water exactly.
Right. It's just it's different substances.
It's different substances. We're pretty sure there is water in there. according again to asteroid biology at NASA, some scientists believe that it is some combination of salts and waters, but we can't on Earth synthesize something that looks just like that.
This is where the bacteria come in again. Of the 3 bacteria that were sampled, Dalton said that 2 of the bacteria are good candidates for life on the icy moon. These bacteria are, Deinococcus radiodurans. Yes, okay, first try. Okay, so Deinococcus radioduranis and Sulfolobus shibatae.
Nice job.
Thank you. Could potentially these bacteria could potentially exist, or bacteria similar to these could potentially exist in Europa, and that they could survive the harsh conditions of Europa. The IR spectrum of these bacteria are pretty similar to the IR spectra that we found in the cracks on the surface of Europa, in between the ice.
Right. It would help explain what's in those cracks. It's also important to note that scientists do think there's some water in there bounded with salt, and some of these extremophiles could qualify as being things that are water bound, and so it would again help explain that spectrum. Brad Dalton, the scientist who came up with this, he does note though that he is very surprised and he is trying to be skeptical, and that he is not claiming to have found life on Europa. This is just
a hypothesis.
Yeah, it's just a hypothesis that this could be possible.
Mm-hmm. And he also mentioned that there were 2 bands on the spectrum that the bacteria on Earth have, that the bacteria on Europa, or what they found in the cracks on Europa don't have, and that this could be explained by the radiation on Europa would eventually erode those spectra away, and then they would match much closer to Europa.
Right. So going back to the radiation that Dalton was talking about, some scientists are concerned that we might have to dig really deep beneath the surface because Europa is subjected to a constant radiation by Jupiter.
As opposed to the sun, because it's so far away that it really isn't receiving as much from the sun.
Right. So radiation is not great for life.
Naturally.
But according to Scientific American, in a Scientific American article, it was discussed that in a lab setting, we had simulated the conditions of Europa. And scientists discovered that we wouldn't have to dig all that far to actually find some of those elements for life, like amino acids. So it makes the promises of an expedition, or the promises of exploring Europa, much more promising. No. It means that if we were to send a mission to Europa, we wouldn't have to dig through miles and miles of ice to find some of the building blocks for life.
Right. Okay, that's it for this episode. If you enjoyed what you heard, make sure to check back next time where we'll be discussing exploration of Europa.
Right. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you next time.
Make sure to like and subscribe for more content.